The rain hammered against my bedroom window like bullets against armor, and I lay there listening to each drop, counting the seconds until Laura's headlights would sweep across our driveway. 3:15 in the morning. Again. My name is Jason Fairburn, and I used to think I had the perfect marriage. Used to think a lot of things, actually. Used to think my wife Laura worked late at her HR director job because she was dedicated. Used to think the new clothes and expensive perfume were for me. Used to think that when she started coming home smelling like another man's cologne, it was just coincidence. But I'm a construction contractor, and I know when a foundation is cracking. The garage door rumbled open downstairs. Laura's BMW purred into its spot next to my dusty work truck, and I heard her heels clicking across the concrete floor. She was trying to be quiet, but Laura had never been good at stealth. Everything she did was designed to be noticed, admired, envied. I rolled over and pretended to be asleep as she slipped into our bedroom. Through half-closed eyes, I watched her undress in the moonlight streaming through our curtains. Her hair was mussed, her lipstick gone, and there was a satisfied smile on her face that I hadn't seen directed at me in months. "Long night at the office?" I asked, my voice cutting through the darkness like a blade. She jumped, clutching her silk blouse to her chest. "Jason, you scared me. I thought you were asleep." Hard to sleep when your wife is out building relationships with clients until 3 in the morning. I sat up, switched on the bedside lamp. Laura squinted in the sudden light, and I could see the guilt written across her face, like graffiti on a wall. "It wasn't that late," she said, but her voice wavered. "We had a company dinner that ran over, and then... And then what? You went back to someone's place for coffee?" Her phone buzzed on the dresser, where she'd set it down. A text message lit up the screen, and even from across the room, I could read the sender's name. Scotty. The message preview showed just enough to make my blood run cold. "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow night, beautiful." Tonight was... Laura lunged for the phone, but I was faster. 20 years of construction work had kept me in shape, and I crossed the room in 3 quick strides. "Give me that," she snapped, reaching for the device. I held it above my head, reading the full message. "Tonight was incredible. I love how you taste, how you feel. My bed feels empty without you." I looked down at my wife of 15 years, the mother of my 2 daughters, and felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. "Scotty? Really, Laura? You're screwing around with someone named Scotty." Her face went through a series of expressions: guilt, fear, defiance, and finally, rage. "You have no right to read my private messages. I have every right when my wife is cheating on me in my own house." I threw the phone onto the bed between us. "How long, Laura? How long have you been lying to me?" "I'm not lying about anything." But even as she said it, she was backing toward the door. "And it's not your house anymore." That stopped me cold. "What did you say?" Laura's chin lifted, and I saw the woman I'd fallen in love with disappear completely, replaced by someone I didn't recognize, someone cold and calculating. "I said it's not your house anymore. Scotty bought it last week. I've been meaning to tell you." The floor felt like it was shifting under my feet. "That's impossible. My name is on the deed." "Was on the deed," she corrected, and now she was smiling. It was the cruelest expression I'd ever seen on her face. "Remember that stack of papers you signed last month? The ones I told you were for refinancing?" I did remember. Laura had come home with a folder full of documents, said we could get a better interest rate, save money on our monthly payments. I'd been exhausted from a 14-hour day pouring concrete, and I'd signed wherever she pointed without reading the fine print. "You transferred the house to your boyfriend." The words came out as a whisper. "Scott Williams," she said, like she was introducing me to him at a dinner party. "He's a real estate developer, very successful, very wealthy, everything you're not." I felt like I'd been hit in the chest with a sledgehammer. "Laura, we have 2 kids. Beth and Janie live here. This is their home. They'll adjust," she said with a shrug. "Kids are resilient. Besides, Scott's penthouse has a pool. They'll love it. You're moving our daughters in with your boyfriend? I'm moving on with my life," she snapped. Something I should have done years ago instead of wasting my time with a man who smells like concrete dust and drives a truck older than our marriage. The insults bounced off me. I'd heard worse from construction crews, but the casual way she dismissed our life together, our children's stability, that cut deep. "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked. Laura walked to our closet and pulled out a suitcase, tossing it onto the bed. "I don't care. You have 48 hours to pack your things and get out. After that, you'll be trespassing. I stared at the suitcase, then at my wife, then at the bedroom that had been ours for over a decade. The walls I'd painted, the hardwood floors I'd installed myself, the ceiling fan I'd hung the weekend after Beth was born. 48 hours, I repeated. 48 hours, she confirmed. And Jason? Don't make this difficult. Scott has lawyers. Good ones. You can't fight this. I picked up the suitcase and headed for the door. At the threshold, I turned back to look at her one more time. She was already changing into a nightgown, humming softly to herself, like she'd just finished a pleasant evening with friends. Laura? What? You might want to ask Scotty if he read all the paperwork before he bought this place. What's that supposed to mean? I smiled, and I could tell from her expression that it wasn't a pleasant sight. It means you both better hope the foundation is solid, because if it's not, the whole thing comes crashing down. I left her standing there, confusion replacing the smug satisfaction on her face. Let her wonder. Let them both wonder. Because what Laura didn't know, what she'd forgotten in her rush to trade up, was that I'd built this house myself. Every nail, every board, every pipe and wire. And more importantly, I still owned the land it sat on. The deed she'd tricked me into signing transferred ownership of the structure, but not the ground underneath it. That was a separate contract, one I'd never signed, one that was locked away in my office safe, along with every other important document related to my business. Scott Williams might own my house, but I owned his foundation, and I was about to teach both of them what happens when you build your dreams on someone else's land. I spent the rest of the night in my truck, parked outside my construction company's office, watching the sunrise paint the sky the color of rust. My phone had been buzzing non-stop since I left the house. Texts from Laura, demanding to know what I'd meant about the foundation. Missed calls from a number I didn't recognize. And one message from my foreman, Manny Gutierrez, asking if I was okay. Manny was the only person I trusted completely. We'd worked together for 8 years, ever since I'd started Fairburn Construction, and he'd seen me through every crisis, from equipment failures to client disputes. If anyone could help me navigate this mess, it was him. I unlocked the office and made coffee, the familiar routine grounding me in something real while my world fell apart around me. The building was nothing fancy, a converted warehouse with a small front office, a larger space for storing equipment, and an apartment upstairs that I'd been using as storage. Suddenly, that cramped space was looking like a palace. Boss? Manny's voice echoed through the building. Your truck's outside, but the lights weren't on. You sleeping here now? Something like that, I called back. He appeared in the office doorway, a stocky man in his 50s with calloused hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He took one look at my face and poured himself a cup of coffee without asking. What happened? I told him everything. The cheating, the house, the 48-hour eviction notice. Manny listened without interrupting, his expression growing darker with each detail. That's cold, even for a lawyer, he said when I finished. But you said you still own the land. Every square inch. I pulled out my keys and unlocked the office safe, retrieving the land lease agreement I'd signed with the county 12 years ago. The house sits on a 99-year lease. Laura's boyfriend owns the building, but he can't do anything with it without my permission. Manny grinned. So you're telling me this fancy real estate developer just bought himself a very expensive pile of lumber that he can't use? That's exactly what I'm telling you. What's the plan? I've been thinking about that all night. First, I need to know everything about Scott Williams. Who he is, what he does, where he lives, who he owes money to. Can you handle that? I know a guy who knows a guy, Manny said. Private investigator, very discreet. Owes me a favor from when I helped him catch his wife cheating. Perfect. Second, I need to document everything. Every conversation, every threat, every time they try to intimidate me. We're going to do this by the book. And third, I looked out the window toward the neighborhood where my house sat, where my daughters were probably getting ready for school, confused about why Daddy wasn't there to make them breakfast. Third, we're going to make sure Scott Williams learns an important lesson about checking the fine print before he signs a contract. The next few hours passed in a blur of phone calls and paperwork. I contacted my lawyer, a sharp woman named Patricia Green, who specialized in real estate law. She confirmed what I already knew. Scott's ownership of the house was legal, but meaningless without access to the land underneath it. The beautiful thing about this situation, Patricia explained over the phone, is that you have all the leverage. He can't sell the house, can't modify it, can't even maintain it without your written permission. And if you terminate the land lease, he has 30 days to remove the structure or it becomes yours by default. Can I terminate it? For cause, yes, if he's using the property for illegal activities, if he's behind on payments to you, or if he violates any of the terms of the lease agreement. What kind of terms? Let me review the contract and get back to you. But Jason, don't do anything rash. We want to be completely legal about this. By noon, Manny's private investigator friend had delivered a comprehensive report on Scott Williams. The man was everything Laura had said. Successful, wealthy, connected. He owned 3 luxury condominiums, drove a Tesla, and had been featured in the local business journal as one of the city's rising stars under 40. He was also leveraged to the eyeballs. Look at this, Manny said, spreading the financial documents across my desk. He's got mortgages on all 3 condos, a business loan for his real estate company, and he just bought your house with money borrowed against his other properties. If any one deal goes bad, the whole thing collapses like a house of cards. Interesting. I studied the papers, looking for weaknesses. What about his personal life? Divorced twice, no kids. Has a reputation for dating married women. Your wife isn't his first, won't be his last. That stung, but it also gave me ammunition. Laura thought she was special, thought she'd found her Prince Charming. Learning she was just another conquest in a long line of them would hurt her pride, and Laura's pride was her most vulnerable spot. There's something else, Manny continued. He's got a restraining order filed against him by his second ex-wife. Apparently, he doesn't take rejection well. What kind of restraining order? The kind that says he threatened her when she tried to leave him. Nothing violent, but intimidation, harassment, showing up at her work. The judge called his behavior controlling and obsessive. I filed that information away. If Scott Williams had a pattern of controlling behavior, it might explain why Laura had been so quick to betray me. Maybe she was more victim than villain. Or maybe she was just greedy and selfish, and I was looking for excuses to soften the blow. Either way, it didn't change what I had to do. My phone rang. Laura's number flashed on the screen. 48 hours, she said, without preamble when I answered. That's what I told you, and I meant it. I remember. Then why are you still in town? Why haven't you started packing? I leaned back in my chair, watching Manny pretend not to eavesdrop while he organized tools in the corner. I've been thinking about what you said, about the house not being mine anymore. It's not. Scott has the deed. Right. Scott Williams, the real estate developer. Very successful, very wealthy. Everything I'm not. There was a pause. You've been checking up on him? Just curious about the man who's going to be living with my daughters. You understand. He's a good man, Jason. Better than you ever were. I'm sure he is. Does he know about the land lease? Another pause, longer this time. What land lease? The one that gives me control over the property your boyfriend thinks he owns. The one that means he can't so much as change a light bulb without my written permission. You're lying. Am I? Why don't you ask him? Better yet, have him call his lawyer. I'm sure they'll be very interested to learn about the little detail he missed when he was so eager to help you screw over your husband. The line went quiet for so long I thought she'd hung up. When she spoke again, her voice was shaky. What do you want? Right now? I want my daughters to know their father didn't abandon them. I want 48 hours to turn into a reasonable timeline for me to find a place to live. And I want you to stop treating me like garbage just because you decided to trade up. And if I don't? I smiled, even though she couldn't see it. Then Scott's going to learn a very expensive lesson about doing business with other people's wives. I hung up and looked at Manny, who was grinning from ear to ear. That was beautiful, boss. But you know she's going to call him, right? They're going to lawyer up, try to find a way around the lease. Let them try, I said. Patricia's already reviewed the contract. It's ironclad. But just to be safe, I want you to set up some cameras around the property. Nothing illegal, just documenting who comes and goes. You think they'll try something stupid? I think Scott Williams is used to getting what he wants, and he's not going to like discovering he just bought the most expensive pile of lumber in the wart. County people like that don't handle frustration well. As if summoned by my words, a black Tesla pulled into the parking lot outside my office. The driver's door opened, and a tall man in an expensive suit climbed out. Even from a distance, I could see the anger in his posture. Speak of the devil, Manny muttered. Scott Williams stormed across the parking lot like he owned it, his Italian leather shoes clicking against the asphalt. He was handsome in the way that money could buy. perfect teeth, perfect hair, perfect tan. Everything about him screamed success and privilege. He didn't bother to knock. "You're Jason Fairburn," he said, bursting through the office door like he was leading a cavalry charge. "And you're the man who bought my house," I replied, not getting up from my chair. "Congratulations. How's the foundation?" His face flushed red. "We need to talk." "I'm listening." "This land lease nonsense is perfectly legal and binding," I interrupted. "Did your lawyer not explain that to you?" "My lawyer says you're trying to extort me." I laughed. "Extort you? By owning property that I bought and paid for 12 years ago? That's an interesting definition of extortion." Scott stepped closer to my desk, trying to intimidate me with his height and his expensive suit. But I'd been intimidated by better men than him. Construction supervisors who could make grown men cry, building inspectors who could shut down a project with a single phone call, bank loan officers who held my company's future in their hands. Scott Williams was just another bully in a nice suit. "What do you want?" he asked. "I want you to stay away from my daughters until the divorce is final. I want you to stop filling my wife's head with ideas about 48-hour eviction notices. And I want you to understand that the land your house sits on belongs to me, and it's going to belong to me for the next 87 years. "That's ridiculous. No one sells a house without including the land rights." "Laura did," I said simply. "Of course, she probably didn't mention that little detail when she was convincing you to buy the place." I could see the wheels turning in his head, the growing realization that he'd been played. Laura had needed him to buy the house so she could get me out of it, but she'd been in such a hurry to make the deal happen that she'd glossed over the complications. "This is temporary," he said finally. "I'll find a way around it." Good luck with that. I stood up, and I was pleased to see that I was taller than him by a couple of inches. But while you're looking, remember that I control access to the utilities, the driveway, and the foundation. If I were you, I'd be very careful about making enemies. Scott's jaw tightened. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm educating you," I said, "about the difference between owning something and controlling it. You own the house. Congratulations. But I control everything that makes it livable." He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him calculating, trying to figure out his next move. Finally, he turned and walked toward the door. "This isn't over," he said. "No," I agreed. "It's just getting started." After he left, Manny whistled low. "That boy's got a temper. You sure you want to poke this bear?" I looked out the window at the Tesla speeding away, leaving rubber marks on my parking lot. "He's not a bear, Manny. He's a bully who's used to getting his way. And the thing about bullies is, they fold the moment someone stands up to them. And if he doesn't fold?" I smiled grimly. "Then I guess we'll find out just how solid his foundation really is." The next morning brought the first real test of my resolve. I was having coffee in my makeshift apartment above the office when Manny burst through the door, holding his phone like it was on fire. "Boss, you need to see this." He showed me Laura's Facebook page. She'd posted a long dramatic message about how her abusive ex-husband was stalking and harassing her new boyfriend, trying to destroy their happiness out of jealousy and spite. The post had already gotten 43 likes and 16 comments, mostly from her work friends, expressing shock and offering support. Abusive? I read the word out loud, tasting how bitter it was. In 15 years of marriage, I never so much as raised my voice to her. "She's trying to control the narrative," Manny said. "Make you look like the bad guy, so when this all goes public, people will be on her side." Let them be on her side. I don't need a popularity contest. I need leverage. But the Facebook post was just the beginning. By 10 o'clock, I'd received calls from 3 different clients asking if the domestic situation mentioned in the local business journal's gossip column would affect their construction projects. By noon, my daughter's school had called to ask if there were any safety concerns they should know about regarding pickup and drop-off arrangements. Laura was waging a public relations war, and she was winning. "We need to respond," Manny insisted. "Tell your side of the story." "No," I said. "That's what she wants. A public fight where she can play the victim. We stick to the plan." The plan was simple in theory, complicated in execution. Patricia Green had found a clause in the land lease agreement that required the property to be used solely for single-family residential purposes. If I could prove Scott was using the house for business activities, like staging real estate meetings or storing company equipment, I could terminate the lease for breach of contract. So we watch and wait, I told Manny. Document everything. Sooner or later, he'll slip up. We didn't have to wait long. That afternoon, I drove past the house, my house, and saw 3 cars in the driveway that didn't belong to Laura or Scott. Through the front window, I could see people in business attire sitting around my dining room table, looking at papers and laptops. I parked across the street and took photos with my phone. 20 minutes later, the meeting broke up, and I watched Scott shake hands with the visitors like he'd just closed a deal. One of them handed him a folder thick with documents. Business meeting. In a property zoned for residential use only. Violation of the lease agreement. I was about to drive away when Laura appeared in the front doorway. She was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. Something expensive and form-fitting that probably cost more than I made in a week. She kissed Scott goodbye like they were starring in a romantic movie, all passion and promises. Then she saw me. Even from across the street, I could see her face change. The loving girlfriend disappeared, replaced by the cold, calculating woman I was learning to recognize. She said something to Scott, pointing in my direction. Scott's head whipped around and our eyes met through my truck's windshield. His expression was pure rage. I started the engine and drove away, but not before I saw him pull out his phone, probably calling his lawyer, or maybe the police. Either way, I'd gotten what I came for, evidence of the lease violation and confirmation that my presence was getting under their skin. Back at the office, I uploaded the photos to my computer and emailed them to Patricia Green. Her response came back within an hour. This is exactly what we need. I'll draft the lease termination notice this afternoon. But before I could celebrate, my phone rang. The caller ID showed my daughter Beth's number. "Daddy?" Her voice was small and scared. "Mom says you can't come to my soccer game tomorrow because you're in trouble with the police." My heart clenched. "That's not true, sweetheart. I'm not in trouble with anyone. But Mom showed me the Facebook thing about you being mean to her boyfriend. Are you really trying to hurt them?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of Laura's manipulation settling on my shoulders like a lead blanket. She was using our children as weapons, turning them against me before I even had a chance to explain my side of the story. "Beth, listen to me very carefully. Your mom and I are having grown-up problems, but none of it is your fault, and none of it means I love you any less. I would never hurt anyone, especially not your mom. Then why can't you just let her be happy?" The question hit me like a punch to the gut. In her 12-year-old mind, the situation was simple. Mommy had found someone new who made her smile, and Daddy was being mean about it. She couldn't understand the betrayal, the lies, the way her mother had destroyed our family for a man she barely knew. It's complicated, baby girl, but I promise you, everything I'm doing is to protect our family, even if it doesn't look that way right now. I have to go. Mom says I'm not supposed to talk to you without her permission. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone like it had just delivered news of a death in the family, which, in a way, it had. "That bad?" Manny asked. "She's turned the kids against me, made me the villain in their story. Kids are smart. They'll figure out the truth eventually." Eventually might be too late. I was still brooding about the phone call when my computer chimed with a new email. The sender's address was one I didn't recognize, but the subject line made my blood run cold. "Stop harassing my girlfriend, or else." The message was short and to the point. "I know where you work, where you live, and where you go. Stay away from Laura, and stay away from my house, or you'll regret it. This is your only warning." It was unsigned, but the sender's IP address traced back to Scott's real estate company. "Look at this." I showed Manny the email. He read it twice, his expression growing darker. "That's a threat, boss." Clear as day. It's also evidence. I forwarded the message to Patricia Green. Scott Williams just made his first big mistake. But if I thought the email was the end of it, I was wrong. An hour later, a police car pulled into my parking lot. 2 officers got out, both looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Jason Fairburn? The older officer, a sergeant with gray hair and tired eyes, approached the office door. "That's me. We need to talk to you about a complaint we received. Someone says you've been stalking and harassing them." I invited them inside, offered coffee, and told them exactly what had been happening. I showed them the land lease agreement, the photos of Scott's business meeting, and the threatening email. By the time I finished, both officers looked like they wanted to arrest someone, but not me. "So let me get this straight," the sergeant said. "Your wife cheated on you, tricked you into signing over your house to her boyfriend, and now they're claiming you're stalking them when you drive past property you still legally own? That's about the size of it. And this boyfriend is using your property for business meetings in violation of a residential lease. According to my lawyer, yes. The younger officer shook his head. I've seen some messy divorces, but this takes the cake. Are you going to arrest me? I asked. For what? Taking pictures of your own property? They can file all the complaints they want, but you haven't broken any laws. The sergeant handed me his card. But do me a favor. If this escalates, call us first. Don't take matters into your own hands. After they left, I sat in the gathering darkness of my office, thinking about Beth's phone call and Scott's threatening email, and Laura's Facebook campaign to destroy my reputation. They were winning the public relations war, turning me into the villain in a story where I was supposed to be the victim. But public relations wars were fought with emotions and half-truths. Legal wars were fought with facts and evidence, and I was about to give them a lesson in the difference. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Green. Patricia? It's Jason. How quickly can you file that lease termination notice? I can have it ready first thing Monday morning. But Jason, once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. Are you sure you want to do this? I looked around the office that had become my home, thought about my daughters who weren't allowed to talk to me, and remembered the satisfied smile on Laura's face when she told me I had 48 hours to get out of my own house. File it, I said, and make sure Scott Williams gets served at his office, in front of all his employees. I want everyone to know exactly what kind of businessman he really is. What about Laura? What about her? She's still your wife, still the mother of your children. Are you sure you want to destroy her life like this? I thought about that for a long moment. Laura had been my partner, my best friend, the woman I'd planned to grow old with. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone who could lie to my face, manipulate our children, and try to destroy my reputation without a second thought. She destroyed her own life the moment she decided to betray our family, I said finally. I'm just making sure she pays the price for it. Monday morning couldn't come fast enough. The 4th of July block party had been a neighborhood tradition for 8 years, ever since Laura and I had moved into the house. I'd helped organize it every year, manning the grill, setting up tables, stringing lights between the oak trees that lined our street. This year, I wasn't invited. But that didn't mean I wasn't going. This is a bad idea, boss, Manny said as we parked 2 blocks away from my old neighborhood. You show up there, they're going to call it harassment. Let them call it whatever they want. I adjusted the small recording device clipped to my shirt collar, perfectly legal in our state, as long as one party to the conversation knew it was being recorded. I want to see my daughters. I want to wish my neighbors a happy holiday, and I want Scott Williams to look me in the eye while he's living in my house. The lease termination notice had been served 3 days earlier, giving Scott 30 days to remove the structure or face legal action. His response had been swift and predictable. A countersuit claiming I was trying to extort him, a restraining order request that had been denied for lack of evidence, and a furious phone call to Laura that half the neighborhood had heard through the thin summer air. According to Mrs. Patterson, who lived next door and had never liked Laura anyway, the fight had been spectacular. Scott screaming about being set up and played for a fool, Laura crying and insisting she hadn't known about the land lease, and both of them blaming me for their problems. The best part, Mrs. Patterson had told me when she called, was when he accused her of lying to him about the house deal. She slapped him, right there, on the front porch, in front of God and everybody. Trouble in paradise, but not enough trouble to break them up, apparently. They were still together, still living in my house, still playing happy family with my daughters. The block party was in full swing when we arrived. Red, white, and blue bunting hung from every porch, kids ran through sprinklers on front lawns, and the smell of barbecue smoke filled the air. It looked like a Norman Rockwell painting, all American wholesomeness and community spirit. I spotted Laura immediately. She was standing near the dessert table, wearing a sundress that showed off her tan, and talking to a group of neighborhood wives who hung on her every word, playing the role of the tragic heroine, no doubt, telling them about her terrible ex-husband who couldn't accept that she'd found happiness with a wonderful new man. Scott was holding court near the beer cooler, a group of men listening to him talk about real estate markets and investment opportunities. He was wearing khaki shorts and a polo shirt, looking like he'd stepped out of a country club catalog, the perfect suburban boyfriend. Neither of them had seen me yet, There's Beth, Manny said, pointing toward the playground area that had been set up in the middle of the street. My older daughter was pushing her sister Janie on a tire swing, both of them laughing at something. They looked happy, carefree, like kids should look. For a moment, I almost turned around and left. Maybe Manny was right. Maybe this was a bad idea. Then Beth looked up and saw me. Her face went through a series of emotions: surprise, joy, confusion, and finally fear. She glanced toward Laura, then back at me, clearly torn between running to hug her father and obeying whatever instructions she'd been given about staying away from me. I made the decision for her, walking over to the playground with what I hoped was a reassuring smile. "Hi, sweetheart." "Daddy!" Janie launched herself off the tire swing and into my arms before anyone could stop her. At 9, she was still young enough to love unconditionally, to not understand the adult complications that had torn our family apart. "You came to the party," she said, squeezing my neck tight enough to cut off my air supply. I wouldn't miss it, I told her, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and feeling my heart crack a little more. "Are you having fun?" "Uh-huh." Scott set up a water balloon fight, and Mrs. Henderson made her famous apple pie, and there's going to be fireworks after dark. That sounds wonderful. Beth approached more cautiously, old enough to sense the undercurrents of tension that were already spreading through the crowd as people noticed my arrival. "Mom said you weren't coming," she said. "Plans change." I hugged her too, feeling her stiffen slightly in my arms. Laura's poison was working, turning my own daughter against me one conversation at a time. "How's your summer going? Are you still taking those art classes?" "Yeah, they're okay." She glanced around nervously. "Daddy, maybe you should—" "Jason." Laura's voice cut through the ambient noise of the party like a blade. I turned to see her approaching, Scott right behind her, both of them wearing expressions that could have frozen the beer in the cooler. "Laura, Scott?" I kept my voice pleasant, conversational. "Great party. Thanks for keeping up the tradition." "You weren't invited," Laura said, her voice tight with controlled anger. "It's a public street," I replied. "Besides, I helped start this tradition. Seems only right that I'd want to continue it. After what you've been doing to us? After the legal harassment and the threats?" I laughed, and I could tell from her expression that it wasn't the reaction she'd expected. "Threats? The only threat I've received was an email from your boyfriend here, warning me to stay away from his house." Several neighbors had drifted closer, drawn by the tension like moths to a flame. Mrs. Patterson was openly eavesdropping, probably already composing the phone calls she'd make later to spread the gossip. The men who'd been listening to Scott's real estate wisdom were watching with the fascination people reserved for car accidents and public meltdowns. "That's not a threat," Scott said, stepping forward. "That's a reasonable request from someone who's tired of being stalked." "Stalked?" I kept my voice level, reasonable. "By driving past property I own?" "You don't own anything," he snapped. "I bought that house fair and square." "You bought the structure," I corrected. "I own the land it sits on. Didn't your lawyer explain the difference?" Scott's face flushed red. "That lease trick won't work. My attorneys are already finding ways around it." "Good luck with that. But while they're looking, you might want to start shopping for a new place to live. You've got 26 days left on the termination notice." "You can't kick us out of our own home," Laura interjected, her voice rising. "It's not your home," I said simply. "It never was. You just borrowed it for a while." The crowd around us was growing larger, the entire block party grinding to a halt as people realized they were witnessing something more dramatic than the usual neighborhood gossip. I could see phones coming out, people starting to record what was clearly going to be a confrontation worth sharing on social media. "This is ridiculous," Scott said. But I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. His lawyers had obviously explained the reality of the situation, and he was starting to understand just how badly he'd been played. "You can't destroy someone's life just because you're jealous." "Jealous?" I looked at Laura, standing beside her boyfriend in her designer sundress, then at my daughters, who were watching their parents tear each other apart in front of the entire neighborhood. "You think I'm jealous of this?" "You think I'm jealous of a man who's so desperate to steal another man's wife that he didn't bother to read the contract before he signed it? You think I'm jealous of a relationship built on lies and betrayal? How dare you?" Laura started, but I cut her off. "How dare I what? Tell the truth? Point out that you destroyed our family for a man you barely know? Mention that you're just another conquest in his long line of married women?" Scott went very still. What did you say? Oh, she didn't tell you about the background check? About your history with married women? About the restraining order your second ex-wife took out against you? The color drained from Laura's face. She looked at Scott, then at me, then at the crowd of neighbors who were hanging on every word. That's a lie, she said, but her voice was shaky. Ask him, I suggested. Ask your wonderful new boyfriend about Sarah Martinez, or Jennifer Walsh, or any of the other wives he's seduced and abandoned over the past 5 years. Scott lunged at me. It wasn't a coordinated attack, just blind rage and wounded pride driving him forward. But I'd been expecting it. Had seen the moment when his control snapped, and I was ready. I sidestepped his charge and grabbed his arm, using his momentum to send him stumbling into the dessert table. Pies and cakes went flying, covering him in frosting and fruit filling as he crashed to the ground. The crowd gasped, phones recording every second of his humiliation. Stay down, I warned him as he tried to get up, his polo shirt now decorated with Mrs. Henderson's famous apple pie. You bastard! He scrambled to his feet, wiping frosting from his eyes. You think you're so smart? You think you've won? I think I've proven my point. What point? That you're a bitter loser who can't accept that his wife found someone better. I looked at Laura, who was staring at Scott like she was seeing him clearly for the first time. The charming, successful businessman was gone, replaced by a man covered in dessert, screaming threats at her ex-husband in front of half the neighborhood. The point, I said quietly, is that you can't build a lasting relationship on someone else's foundation. Sooner or later, the ground shifts, and everything comes crashing down. Scott wiped more frosting from his face and took another step toward me. This isn't over. No, I agreed. It's not. You've still got 26 days to figure out how to move a house you can't afford to lose. I turned to my daughters, who were staring at the scene with wide eyes and open mouths. I love you both, I told them. Don't ever forget that. Then I walked away, leaving Scott Williams standing in the ruins of the dessert table, covered in pie filling and public humiliation, while Laura tried to explain to our neighbors why her new boyfriend had just attacked her. Ex-husband at a 4th of July block party. Behind me, I could hear Mrs. Patterson already starting to spread the gossip. Did you see that? He just stood there, calm as you please, while that boyfriend of Laura's went crazy. Always knew that boy was trouble. 26 days and counting. The video went viral. Not Hollywood viral, but small-town viral, which in some ways was worse. By the next morning, footage of Scott Williams face-planting into the dessert table was circulating on Facebook, Instagram, and the local news station's website. The headline on the Channel 7 story read, "Local real estate developer loses cool at neighborhood block party." I was drinking coffee in my office, scrolling through the comments on various social media posts, when Patricia Green called. Have you seen the news? She asked. Hard to miss it. Scott's lawyers filed an emergency motion this morning, claiming you provoked the altercation, and that the video evidence shows you assaulting their client. I laughed. The video shows me stepping out of the way while he ran into a table full of desserts. That's exactly what the judge said when he denied their motion. But Jason, this is escalating quickly. They're getting desperate, and desperate people do stupid things. How stupid? They're claiming the land lease is fraudulent, that you forged documents to create a fake ownership claim. It's nonsense, but it's going to require a formal hearing to resolve. How long will that take? 2 weeks, maybe 3. But here's the interesting part. Scott's mortgage company is getting nervous. Apparently, they're not comfortable lending money on a property with disputed ownership. They're demanding immediate payment of the full loan amount. I set down my coffee cup. How much does he owe them? $450,000, due in full by the end of the month. The same amount he'd paid Laura for the house. If Scott couldn't come up with the money, the bank would foreclose, and he'd lose everything he'd invested in stealing my home. There's more, Patricia continued. Laura's divorce lawyer called my office this morning. Apparently, she wants to negotiate. Negotiate what? A settlement. She's willing to transfer the house back to you in exchange for a lump sum alimony payment and guaranteed custody of the girls. I considered this. It would solve the immediate problem, get my house back, and end the legal nightmare that was consuming my life. But it would also let Laura and Scott off the hook for what they'd done. And something deep in my gut rebelled against that idea. How much does she want? $200,000. I don't have $200,000. She knows that. I think this is just a negotiating tactic, trying to find out how far you're willing to go. Tell her lawyer that my counteroffer is this. She can have whatever the divorce court decides to give her and not a penny more. The house stays with me. Jason, no deals, Patricia. They made their choice when they decided to destroy my family. Now they can live with the consequences. After I hung up, I sat in the silence of my office, thinking about the path that had brought me to this point. 6 weeks ago, I'd been a happily married man with a successful business and 2 daughters who adored me. Now I was living above my office, fighting a legal war with my own wife, and watching my children's respect for me erode with every passing day. But I was also closer to victory than I'd ever been. Manny knocked on the office door and entered without waiting for permission. Boss, we've got a problem. What kind of problem? The kind with badges and search warrants. Through the office window, I could see 2 police cars pulling into the parking lot, followed by an unmarked sedan that screamed federal agent. What do they want? I asked. According to the warrant, they're investigating allegations of fraud, forgery, and extortion related to the land lease dispute. My blood ran cold. Scott's lawyers actually convinced someone to investigate the lease? Looks that way. But boss, there's something else. I got a call from my guy at the courthouse. Scott Williams filed for bankruptcy protection this morning. I stared at him. Bankruptcy. Chapter 11. Claims he's been the victim of a malicious legal attack that's destroyed his business and his personal finances. The police officers were approaching the office door now, their expressions professionally neutral, but their body language suggesting this wasn't a friendly visit. Mr. Fairburn? The lead officer, a detective I didn't recognize, held up his badge. We need to ask you some questions about your property dispute with Scott Williams. I invited them in, offered coffee, and spent the next 2 hours explaining the land lease agreement, the house sale, and the legal battle that had followed. They examined my documents, took photographs, and asked the same questions in different ways, looking for inconsistencies in my story. By the time they left, I was exhausted but confident. The lease was legitimate, the ownership was clear, and every action I'd taken had been legal and properly documented. But the investigation had served Scott's purpose anyway. Word would spread that I was being investigated for fraud, that maybe I wasn't the innocent victim I claimed to be. In the court of public opinion, being investigated was almost as damaging as being convicted. He's good, I told Manny after the police left. I'll give him that. He can't win the legal fight, so he's trying to destroy my reputation instead. What's our next move? I looked out the window at the empty parking lot where the police cars had been. We finish this tonight. What do you mean? I mean, it's time for Scott Williams to learn what happens when you build your dreams on someone else's foundation. That evening, I drove to the house, my house, for what I hoped would be the last time as an outsider. Laura's BMW was in the driveway next to Scott's Tesla, and lights were on in every room. Through the windows, I could see them moving around, packing boxes and loading them into cars. They were abandoning ship. I parked across the street and called Patricia Green. The bankruptcy filing changes things, she explained. Scott can claim the house as a protected asset while the court sorts out his debts. It could tie up the property for months, maybe years. What about the lease termination? Still valid, but harder to enforce if he's under bankruptcy protection. I ended the call and sat in my truck, watching my wife and her boyfriend pack up their lives and prepare to run away from the mess they'd created. In a few hours, they'd be gone, and I'd be left with an empty house on land I owned but couldn't use, while they started over somewhere else with new identities and a new story about the crazy ex-husband who'd tried to destroy them. That's when I saw the moving truck. It was parked around the corner, a small U-Haul that Scott was loading with boxes and furniture. Not just personal belongings, but expensive items, artwork, electronics, things that should have been included in his bankruptcy filing as assets. I started taking pictures. For the next hour, I documented Scott Williams systematically looting the house, removing valuable items that legally belonged to his creditors. It was bankruptcy fraud, plain and simple, and I had photographic evidence of every box he carried out. My phone rang. Laura's number. I see you out there, she said without preamble. It's a public street. What do you want, Jason? Haven't you done enough damage? I looked at the house where I'd planned to raise my daughters, where I'd dreamed of growing old with the woman I loved, where I'd built a life that had been destroyed by greed and betrayal. I want you to know that I loved you, I said. For 15 years, I loved you more than my own life. I would have done anything for you, given you anything you asked for. There was silence on the other end of the line. But you threw it all away for a man you barely knew. A man who's used you just like he's used a dozen other women. And now you're helping him commit bankruptcy fraud, making yourself an accessory to a federal crime. What are you talking about? The artwork he just loaded into that truck, the electronics, the jewelry, all of that should be disclosed to the bankruptcy court as assets. By helping him hide it, you're committing a felony. Another long silence. What do you want? She asked again, but her voice was smaller now, frightened. I want you to stop the truck, unload everything, and put it back in the house. I want Scott to withdraw his bankruptcy filing and honor the lease termination notice. And I want both of you out of my house by tomorrow morning. And if we don't, then I send these photos to the FBI, the bankruptcy court, and every news outlet in the state. Scott Williams goes to federal prison, and you go with him. I could hear her breathing on the other end of the line, could almost see her weighing her options. Stay with Scott and risk prison, or cut her losses and try to salvage something from the wreckage of her choices. You bastard, she whispered. I'm the bastard who's offering you a way out, I replied. Take it or leave it. The line went dead. 10 minutes later, Scott emerged from the house carrying a box of electronics toward the U-Haul. He saw me sitting in my truck and stopped, staring at me across the street like he was trying to decide whether to run or fight. He chose fight. Scott dropped the box and started walking toward my truck, his face twisted with rage and desperation. But before he could reach me, Laura appeared in the doorway. Scott! Don't! He turned toward her, and I could see them arguing, her hands gesturing frantically while he shook his head and pointed at me. The argument escalated, their voices carrying across the quiet street, until finally Scott threw his hands up in defeat and stalked back toward the house. Over the next hour, I watched them unload the truck, carrying boxes and furniture back into the house like a movie running in reverse. When the truck was empty, Scott climbed into his Tesla and drove away without looking back. Laura stood in the driveway for a long moment, staring at my truck. Then she walked across the street and tapped on my window. I rolled it down. He's gone, she said. Scott's gone. The house is yours. Just like that? Just like that. She looked older than her 36 years, worn down by the stress and drama of the past few weeks. I'll be out by tomorrow morning. Where will you go? Does it matter? I thought about that. 6 weeks ago, it would have mattered more than anything in the world. Now, looking at the stranger who used to be my wife, I realized it didn't matter at all. The girls, I started, will stay with you during the week, with me on weekends, just like we discussed with the lawyers. She turned to walk away, then stopped and looked back. For what it's worth, Jason, I'm sorry. Not for leaving. That was the right choice for both of us. But for how I did it, you didn't deserve that. No, I agreed. I didn't. She nodded and walked back to the house, leaving me alone in my truck with the taste of victory turning bitter in my mouth. I'd won. The house was mine, my reputation was intact, and Scott Williams was facing bankruptcy and possible federal charges. But the cost of that victory was everything I'd spent 15 years building. My marriage, my family, my daughter's respect. Sometimes winning feels a lot like losing. But as I drove back to my office that night, I realized something important. I was still standing. Laura and Scott had tried to destroy me, had used every weapon at their disposal, legal, financial, emotional, and I'd survived. More than survived. I'd fought back and won. That had to count for something. The next morning, I moved back into my house. 3 weeks later, I was having breakfast in my own kitchen when the local news ran a story that made me smile for the first time in months. Federal agents arrested prominent real estate developer Scott Williams yesterday on charges of bankruptcy fraud and money laundering, the anchor announced over footage of Scott being led away in handcuffs. Williams allegedly concealed assets worth over $200,000 during bankruptcy proceedings, and investigators say they have photographic evidence of the defendant removing valuable items from properties that should have been disclosed to the court. I turned off the television and finished my coffee, thinking about the chain of events that had brought Scott Williams to this moment. His greed had led him to steal another man's wife. His arrogance had led him to buy a house without reading the fine print. His desperation had led him to commit federal crimes. And my patience had led to his downfall. The house felt different now that it was truly mine again. I'd repainted the bedroom, replaced the furniture that Laura had taken, and turned Scott's home office back into a playroom for the girls. It was slowly becoming a home again instead of a crime scene. Beth and Janie were adjusting to the new reality better than I'd expected. The weekend custody arrangement was working, and Laura had stopped poisoning them against me once she realized I held all the cards. She was living in a small apartment across town, working extra hours to pay for the legal bills that Scott had left behind. She'd made her choices. Now she was living with them. I was getting ready to leave for work when someone knocked on the front door. Through the peephole, I could see a man in an expensive suit, but not one I recognized. Mr. Fairburn? My name is David Chen. I'm Scott Williams' business partner. I opened the door, but didn't invite him in. What can I do for you? I think you know why I'm here. Actually, I didn't, but I waited for him to explain. Scott's arrest has created some complications for our business. There are properties, contracts, obligations that need to be resolved. That sounds like a problem for Scott's lawyers. Some of those obligations involve you, Mr. Fairburn. Specifically, they involve this house. I felt a chill run down my spine. What are you talking about? Chen smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. Scott borrowed money against this property to finance several development projects. When he bought the house from your wife, he used it as collateral for a $2 million construction loan. That's impossible. You can't borrow against property you don't own. You're right. But Scott told the bank that he owned both the house and the land. He forged documents to support that claim. The chill turned into a full-blown freeze. Are you saying? I'm saying that when the bank discovers the fraud, they're going to come after this property to recover their money. And since you're the actual owner, you're going to be responsible for Scott's debts. I stared at him, trying to process what he was telling me. That's not how it works. I never signed anything, never agreed to any loans. Doesn't matter. The bank has a legal claim on this property based on fraudulent documents that Scott filed. It's going to take years of litigation to sort out, and in the meantime, this house will be tied up in court. What do you want? I want to buy the property from you. Cash. Fair market value, quick closing. You walk away with enough money to start over somewhere else, and I deal with the legal complications. And if I don't sell? Chen's smile turned predatory. Then you spend the next 5 years fighting banks and federal prosecutors, watching your legal bills pile up while this house sits empty and worthless. Either way, you lose everything. The only question is whether you get paid for it. After he left, I sat in my kitchen, staring at the walls I'd painted and the floors I'd installed, thinking about the cosmic joke that had become my life. I'd fought so hard to keep this house, had sacrificed my marriage and my relationship with my daughters to win it back, and now it was going to be taken away by a debt I've never incurred. I called Patricia Green. It's possible, she admitted, after I explained Chen's visit. If Scott used forged documents to borrow against your property, the bank might have a legal claim regardless of the fraud. It would take years to resolve, and the legal cost would be enormous. So I lose either way? Maybe. Or maybe this Chen character is bluffing, trying to buy your property cheap by scaring you with legal threats. How do we find out? I'll make some calls, see what I can learn about Scott's business dealings. But Jason, you need to prepare for the possibility that this fight isn't over. That night, I couldn't sleep. I walked through the house, touching the walls and fixtures that had cost me everything to keep, wondering if it had all been for nothing. Maybe Laura had been right to leave. Maybe I was just a stubborn fool who couldn't accept that some battles can't be won. I was standing in the living room, looking out at the street where I'd lived for 12 years, when I saw a familiar figure walking up my driveway. Manny, carrying a 6-pack of beer and wearing a grim expression. Heard about your visitor today, he said when I opened the door. News travels fast. Mrs. Patterson saw the suit, figured it was more legal trouble. She called me. We sat on the front porch drinking beer and watching the neighborhood settle into evening quiet. Kids riding bikes, couples walking dogs, the ordinary rhythms of suburban life continuing around us. So what's the plan, boss? I took a long drink of beer, tasting the bitterness and thinking about the question. I don't know. Maybe there is no plan. Maybe some fights you just can't win. That doesn't sound like the Jason Fairburn I know. The Jason Fairburn you know just spent 2 months destroying his family to win back a house that's about to be taken away by a bank he's never done business. With Manny was quiet for a while, drinking his beer and thinking. Finally, he set down the bottle and turned to face me. You know what I think? What? I think you're looking at this all wrong. You keep thinking about this house like it's the prize, like keeping it means you won, but that's not what you won. What did I win? You won the right to choose. Laura and Scott tried to take that away from you, tried to force you out and make you disappear, but you fought back, and now you get to decide what happens next. I thought about that. And what should I decide? That's up to you. But whatever you decide, make sure it's your choice, not something that's forced on you by banks or lawyers or ex-wives. The next morning, I made my choice. I called David Chen and told him I'd take his offer, but with conditions. He'd pay fair market value, cover all my legal costs, and give me 60 days to find a new place to live. In return, he'd get a house that came with $2 million in legal problems. You're making a smart decision, he said. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just tired of fighting. But I wasn't done fighting. Not completely. While Chen's lawyers prepared the sale documents, I spent 3 days systematically documenting every improvement I'd made to the house over the years. Every nail I'd driven, every pipe I'd installed, every fixture I'd bought and paid for. Then I removed all of it. Light fixtures, ceiling fans, custom cabinets, hardwood floors, bathroom tiles, kitchen appliances, everything that wasn't permanently attached to the structure came out. By the time I was finished, Chen was buying an empty shell that would need $50,000 in improvements just to be livable. "You can't do this," he shouted when he saw what I'd done. "This is vandalism." "This is recovery of personal property," I corrected, showing him the receipts that proved I'd paid for every item. "The sale contract specifies the house and land, not the contents or improvements." "My lawyers will stop this." "Your lawyers will tell you the same thing mine told me. I have every right to remove property that belongs to me." Chen's face turned red with rage, but there was nothing he could do. The closing was scheduled for the next day, and backing out now would cost him more than paying for the improvements. That evening, I loaded the last of my belongings into a moving truck and took one final walk through the empty house. 12 years of my life, reduced to bare walls and concrete floors. It should have felt like defeat, but instead I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Peace. I was free. Free from the legal battles, free from the memories, free from the need to prove that I could keep what was mine. Laura and Scott had taken my house, but I was taking my life back. The next morning, I signed the papers that transferred ownership to Chen, deposited a check for $400,000, and drove away from the neighborhood where I'd raised my daughters and lost my marriage. But I didn't go far. The house I bought was 6 blocks away, in the same school district, close enough that Beth and Janie could walk to their old friends' houses. It was smaller than the old place, but it was mine. Really mine. With no hidden leases or fraudulent loans or ex-wives who could take it away. 3 months later, I was installing a new kitchen when Patricia Green called with news that made the whole ordeal worthwhile. "Scott Williams was sentenced today," she said. 5 years in federal prison, full restitution to the bank, and permanent disbarment from real estate licensing. What about the house? The bank foreclosed last month. Chen lost everything he invested, plus another $100,000 in legal fees. The property sold at auction for half what he paid you. I set down my hammer and smiled. So, he bought a house for $400,000, spent $50,000 fixing it up, lost it to foreclosure, and ended up with nothing. That's about the size of it. Sometimes, karma works exactly the way it's supposed to. That evening, I was grilling burgers in my backyard when Beth and Janie arrived for their weekly dinner. They were both excited about school starting, chattering about new teachers and friends and the art class that Beth was taking. "Dad," Janie said as we sat down to eat, "I like this house better than the old one." "Why's that, sweetheart?" "Because it's ours. Really ours. Nobody can take it away." I looked at my daughters, healthy and happy despite everything they'd been through, and realized that Manny had been right. The house had never been the prize. The real victory was sitting at my table, calling me dad, and trusting me to keep them safe. Laura had destroyed our marriage, but she hadn't destroyed our family. Scott had stolen my house, but he hadn't stolen my future. And I had learned something valuable about the difference between winning and choosing. Sometimes, the best revenge is simply refusing to let someone else's choices define your life. Find your life, 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 find your life.